For 7 years, I was the perfect husband, until I discovered my wife's manipulation playbook. Every time I said no, affection vanished. Every disagreement led to frozen silence. I'd been trained like a dog to follow commands, rewarded with intimacy only when I obeyed. But the day she demanded that $3,000 watch, something inside me snapped. I was done being manipulated, done walking on eggshells in my own home. What happened next shocked us both. And when her friends started noticing the new me, my wife's carefully constructed control system began crumbling before her eyes. My name is Adrian Hicks. I'm 45 years old, and I've been married to Olivia for almost a decade now. We met at a friend's barbecue in Chicago back in the summer of 2014. She was beautiful, smart, and had this laugh that could light up a room. I was smitten from the moment I saw her. The first few years were great, passionate, exciting, everything you'd hope for in a new relationship. We moved in together after 6 months, got engaged a year later, and tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony at her parents' lake house in Michigan. But something changed after we settled into married life. At first, it was subtle, so subtle that I barely noticed it. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs that I chose to ignore. Whenever Olivia didn't get her way, she'd withdraw. Not just emotionally, but physically too. If I couldn't make it to one of her work functions, or if I didn't agree with her choice of vacation destination, or even something as simple as not wanting to go to a particular restaurant she had her heart set on, she'd turn cold. No affection, no intimacy, no warmth. At first, I thought she just needed space to process disappointment. Everyone deals with frustration differently, right? I'd give her time, then try to reconnect, usually by giving in to whatever she wanted in the first place. Like clockwork, she'd warm up again. The cold shoulder would disappear, replaced by the loving wife I thought I knew. It took me years to realize that this wasn't just a quirk of her personality. It was a strategy, a calculated method of control. I remember the exact moment it all clicked for me. We were planning our annual vacation, and I suggested Colorado for some hiking. Olivia immediately shot it down. She wanted to go to Cancun, stay at an all-inclusive resort where we'd spent a fortune 3 years ago. I explained that I'd rather try somewhere new, somewhere more active than just sitting on a beach for a week. Her face changed instantly. That familiar mask slipped into place, distant, detached, cold. That night, when I reached for her hand while watching TV, she pulled away. When I leaned in to kiss her goodnight, she turned her face so my lips landed on her cheek instead of her mouth. The pattern continued for days. Each time I tried to connect, she'd find some way to reject me. Not outright. She was too smart for that. Instead, she'd claim exhaustion, a headache, stress from work. Always with that same message. Affection was being withheld as punishment. And that's when I realized this had been happening our entire marriage. Every time I didn't fall in line with what Olivia wanted, she'd cut me off emotionally until I gave in. I had been trained like a dog. Perform the right trick, get the treat, disobey, and no affection for you. Sitting there in our bedroom, watching her pretend to be absorbed in her book while actively ignoring me, something inside me just snapped. I was done playing this game. I was done being manipulated. Little did I know that my decision that night would change everything between us forever. The straw that broke the camel's back wasn't even a big deal, at least not on paper. Olivia had been dropping hints about a designer watch for weeks. Not subtle hints either. We're talking full-on pictures texted to me, links to the website, accidentally leaving the catalog open on the coffee table. The works. Now, I've never been tight-fisted with money. I love spoiling my wife when I can. But this watch cost almost $3,000, and we just dropped a small fortune on replacing our deck last month. It wasn't that I didn't want her to have it. I just wanted to wait until our bank account had recovered a bit. "Babe," she said that evening, snuggling up to me on the couch, her voice sweet as honey. "My birthday's next month." I knew exactly where this was going. "I know, honey. I was thinking maybe we could take that weekend trip to Nashville you've been talking about." She frowned. "But the watch would be perfect. I could wear it every day and think of you." "I know, Liv, and I want to get it for you. Just not right now. Maybe for Christmas." The transformation was immediate. The warmth vanished from her eyes. She pulled away from me like I'd suddenly developed a contagious disease and muttered, "Forget it," before grabbing her phone and retreating to the bedroom. That night, I climbed into bed beside her. Force of habit had me reaching for her, wanting to pull her close. The second my hand touched her waist, she flinched away. "Not tonight," she said flatly. "I'm tired." I'd seen this movie before. I knew exactly how it went. She'd freeze me out for days, maybe even weeks, until I caved and bought the damn watch just to end the Cold War in our bedroom. It was the same song and dance we'd been doing for years. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the blatant manipulation of it all. Or maybe I was just tired of walking on eggshells in my own marriage. Either way, I found myself saying, "That's fine," before turning over and going to sleep without another word. The next morning, I got up early, made myself breakfast, and headed out for a long bike ride, something I used to love but had gradually stopped doing as our marriage progressed. When I returned, Olivia was sitting at the kitchen island, a puzzled look on her face. "Where were you?" she asked, clearly not used to me being gone when she woke up. "Went for a ride," I said, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. "Gonna shower. Then I thought I'd call up Mark and see if he wants to catch the game at O'Malley's." Her eyebrows shot up. "But we usually do brunch on Saturdays." I shrugged. "Change of plans. You seemed like you wanted space last night, so I'm giving it to you." For a split second, confusion flashed across her face. This wasn't how our game usually played out. By now, I was supposed to be apologizing, promising to buy the watch, doing whatever it took to get back in her good graces. Instead, I was walking away. And for the first time in our marriage, it felt damn good. The next few days felt like I was breaking out of prison I hadn't even realized I was in. Instead of tiptoeing around Olivia's mood, I started living on my own terms again. Saturday evening, I met up with Mark at O'Malley's. We grabbed a booth, ordered some wings, and watched the Cubs game. It felt like old times, before I'd gradually stopped accepting invitations because Olivia would get that look in her eye whenever I mentioned going out without her. "Dude, where have you been hiding?" Mark asked, clinking his beer against mine. "Feels like I haven't seen you in months." "Been busy," I said, not wanting to get into the complexities of my marriage. "But I'm making changes." When I got home around midnight, Olivia was waiting up, pretending to read a book. Her eyes followed me as I kicked off my shoes. "Have fun?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yeah, actually. It was great to catch up with Mark." I headed to the bathroom to brush my teeth, not giving her the argument she was clearly fishing for. Sunday, I took my old Gibson guitar out of the closet where it had been gathering dust for years. Olivia had never liked my noise, as she called it, so I'd eventually stopped playing. My fingers were rusty, but muscle memory kicked in, and soon I was strumming old Eagles songs in the spare room. Olivia appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Seriously? I'm trying to relax." I just smiled. "I'll keep it down, but I'm not stopping. Been too long since I played." Her eyes widened slightly, not used to this version of me. By Wednesday, Olivia seemed to realize that her usual tactics weren't working. The cold shoulder wasn't bringing me to my knees. Instead of apologizing and buying the watch to make peace, I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd let go dormant. I started hitting the gym before work, reconnected with an old college buddy for lunch, and even signed up for a woodworking class I've been eyeing for months. Each day, I felt more like myself, the man I was before I started constantly bending to avoid Olivia's emotional manipulation. Thursday night, I was in the garage working on a small side table for my first woodworking project when Olivia came in, looking unusually uncertain. "There's a work dinner tomorrow night," she said, leaning against my workbench. "The new VP will be there. It would look good if you came." In the past, I would have immediately agreed, regardless of my own plans. This time, I took a moment before responding. "Sorry, I've got plans. Promised Mike I'd help him install his new TV setup." Her face fell. "Can't you reschedule? This is important, Adrian." "So is keeping my word to my friend," I replied, turning back to sand the table edge. Olivia stood there for a long moment, clearly at a loss. This wasn't the husband she was used to, the one who dropped everything whenever she applied pressure. "Fine," she finally said, her voice tight. "I'll tell them you couldn't make it." As she stormed out, I felt a strange mix of guilt and liberation. The old Adrian would have called Mike and canceled. The new Adrian was done being manipulated by his wife's moods. And when Olivia came home from her dinner the next night and slipped into bed without saying a word, turning her back to me in what had become her signature move, I simply rolled over and went to sleep. For the first time in years, I wasn't losing sleep over her emotional games. A month into my new approach, Things at home had settled into an uncomfortable stalemate. Olivia had figured out that her usual cold shoulder routine wasn't having the desired effect, but she wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. It was her friend Rebecca's birthday, and they had planned to get together at our place, something Olivia had forgotten to mention until the day before. Normally, I would have been annoyed at the lack of notice, but honestly, I was curious to see how the evening would play out. I ordered some nice wine and picked up a cake from Olivia's favorite bakery. Not to earn brownie points, but because it was the decent thing to do for guests coming to our home. When I walked in with the bags, Olivia looked surprised. "You got wine and cake?" She eyed me suspiciously, like I might have ulterior motives. "Yeah, figure it would be nice for Rebecca's birthday." I set everything on the counter and headed upstairs to shower. When the guests arrived, 4 of Olivia's closest friends, I made an effort to be sociable. Not the wallflower husband I'd become over the years, hovering in the background until called upon, but an actual participant in the evening. I poured wine, joined conversations, and even told a story about a disastrous camping trip that had everyone, including Rebecca, doubled over with laughter. "Adrian, when did you get so entertaining?" Sarah, one of Olivia's friends, asked, raising her glass in my direction. "You're usually so quiet at these things." I noticed Olivia watching this exchange, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Just in a good mood, I guess," I replied, refilling Sarah's glass. As the evening progressed, I found myself genuinely enjoying the company. These were smart, funny women who I'd never really gotten to know because I'd always kept to the sidelines at Olivia's gatherings. At one point, I was telling Jessica about the woodworking class I'd started. "That sounds amazing," she said. "My husband's been talking about trying something like that." "He should do it," I encouraged. "It's really satisfying creating something with your hands." "Maybe you could show him some of your work sometime," Jessica suggested. "Anytime," I replied. "I'm just getting started, but I'd be happy to share what I've learned." I caught Olivia staring at us, a strange expression on her face. It wasn't anger exactly, more like confusion mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. After everyone left, I was loading the dishwasher when Olivia leaned against the counter beside me. "You were different tonight," she said, studying me. "Different how?" "I don't know. More present." Everyone noticed. I shrugged. "I had a good time. Your friends are cool." "Jessica seemed to think so," she said, a hint of edge in her voice. I almost laughed. Was Olivia jealous? The thought was oddly validating. Jessica's happily married, Liv. We were just talking about woodworking. "Since when do you care about impressing my friends?" I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I said honestly. Just being myself. That seemed to throw her. She'd been ready for a fight, armed with accusations of flirting or showing off. My simple answer left her with nowhere to go. "Whatever," she finally said, turning to leave. "I'm going to bed." As I finished cleaning up, I realized something had shifted tonight. For years, Olivia had been the social butterfly, while I played the supportive, forgettable spouse. Tonight, I'd stepped out of that shadow, and it had clearly rattled her. For the first time in our marriage, I was no longer chasing her approval, and that change was starting to make her chase mine. The real eye-opener came at Jim and Kate's annual summer barbecue. This was an event we'd attended every year. A mix of neighbors, co-workers, and friends gathered in their sprawling backyard for food and drinks. In previous years, I'd stuck to Olivia like glue, letting her lead the social interactions while I nodded along, the dutiful husband. This time, I made a beeline for Jim and some guys setting up the horseshoe pit, leaving Olivia standing with Kate near the drinks table. "Adrian." Jim clapped me on the shoulder. "Man, where have you been hiding? Haven't seen you at poker night in ages." "Been too long," I agreed, accepting a beer from the cooler. "Deal me in next time." I spent the afternoon moving between conversation groups, catching up with people I knew but hadn't really connected with in years. I laughed at jokes, shared stories about my woodworking projects, and even joined in a heated but good-natured debate about the Bears' prospects for the coming season. From across the yard, I occasionally caught Olivia watching me with an unreadable expression. At one point, Mark's wife Jennifer engaged me in a long conversation about hiking trails around Chicago, something Olivia had zero interest in, but I'd always enjoyed. "We should all go sometime," Jennifer suggested. "Mark's been talking about getting back into hiking." "I'd be up for that," I said genuinely. "Just let me know when." Later, when I was helping Jim clean the grill, Olivia appeared at my side, her smile tight. "I'm getting tired," she said pointedly, ready to head home. Normally, I would have immediately agreed, regardless of whether I was enjoying myself. This time was different. "I promised Jim I'd help pack up the tables when everyone's gone," I said. "Why don't you take the car? I can catch a ride with Mark later." Her eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting this response. "I don't mind waiting," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't really an offer. "No need. Might be a while, and I know you've got that early meeting tomorrow." I gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and turned back to the grill, effectively ending the discussion. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of confusion and irritation with no clear target. She couldn't very well make a scene at someone else's party, and I hadn't been rude, just unavailable. Eventually, she left, though not before making sure everyone within earshot knew she had an early morning the next day. I ended up staying another 2 hours, playing cards with the guys, helping clean up, and catching a ride home with Mark, just as I'd said. When I walked in, the house was dark except for the reading light in our bedroom. I got ready for bed quietly, slipping in beside Olivia, who was pretending to be asleep. But I could tell by her breathing that she was wide awake, probably had been since she got home, waiting to see when I'd return and whether I'd apologize for not leaving with her. I didn't either. I simply said, "Good night, Liv," and rolled over to sleep. 3 months into my personal revolution, Olivia was clearly starting to worry. Her usual tactics had failed, and now she was trying something new, actually being nice. Not the calculated niceness that preceded asking for something, but a genuine attempt at reconnection. It started with small things. Coffee waiting for me in the morning. My favorite meals appearing on weeknights. Asking about my woodworking projects with what seemed like actual interest. At first, I was suspicious. Years of conditioning had taught me to look for the strings attached to any kindness. But as the days passed, I realized this might be Olivia's version of an olive branch. One evening, as I was sketching designs for a bookshelf in my notebook, she settled beside me on the couch, closer than she'd sat in weeks. "That looks complicated," she said, nodding at my drawing. "Not really. Once you understand the basics," I replied, surprised by her interest. She hesitated, then asked, "Could you show me how it works sometime?" I looked up, genuinely startled. Olivia had never shown the slightest interest in woodworking before. "Sure, if you want." "I'd like that," she said, and the strange thing was, she sounded sincere. The next day, I came home to find a book on advanced woodworking techniques on the counter with a note. "Saw this and thought of you." Oh, it was thoughtful, unexpected, and completely out of character for the Olivia I'd known these past few years. That weekend, Jessica and her husband Ryan invited us over for dinner. In the past, Olivia would have dominated these social gatherings, with me playing the quiet, supportive husband. This time, when Ryan asked about my woodworking, I dove into an enthusiastic explanation of the bookshelf I was designing. "That sounds amazing," Ryan said. "I've always wanted to try something like that. You should come by sometime," I offered. "I could show you the basics." "I'd love that," Ryan replied, looking genuinely excited. Throughout this exchange, I noticed Olivia watching me with a strange expression, not angry or jealous like before, but something closer to admiration. And when Jessica complimented my knowledge, Olivia actually chimed in. "He's always been good with his hands," she said, a hint of pride in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. On the drive home, the car was filled with a comfortable silence that had been rare in our marriage lately. "That was fun," Olivia said finally. "Jessica and Ryan are great." "Yeah, they are," I agreed. She hesitated, then added, "It's nice seeing you like this." "Happy." I glanced over, trying to read her expression in the dim light from the dashboard. "It feels good," I admitted. For the first time in months, we fell asleep that night, facing each other instead of turn away, a small but significant shift in our ongoing Cold War. I wasn't ready to declare victory or surrender, but something was definitely changing between us. The real test came when Olivia's sister Madeline announced she was getting married in Colorado, a destination wedding at a mountain resort that would require a long weekend away. In the past, these family events have been a minefield, with Olivia micromanaging my behavior and me walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her cold shoulder in an unfamiliar place. Madeline sent the formal invitation. Olivia mentioned one evening, sliding an embossed envelope across the counter. It's Columbus Day weekend in Aspen. I looked over the details. Nice location. Mom's already called twice asking what we're wearing. Olivia rolled her eyes, but her tone was light. You know how she gets about family photos. I nodded, remembering previous family gatherings where my clothing choices had been vetted and often rejected by Olivia before we left the house. I was thinking, she continued, hesitating slightly, you could wear that navy suit you got for Jim's wedding. It looks really good on you. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by both the compliment and the lack of a direct order. That works for me. The weekend of the wedding arrived, and, as we boarded our flight to Denver, I braced myself for the old pattern to resurface. Family events had a way of triggering Olivia's controlling tendencies, and I half expected her to revert to type once we were around her parents and siblings. But something unexpected happened instead. At the rehearsal dinner, when her Uncle Robert cornered me with his usual political monologue, Olivia appeared at my side with a fresh drink and an escape plan. Sorry to interrupt, Uncle Robert, but Mom's looking for Adrian to help with the slideshow setup. As she guided me away, she whispered, figured you'd served your time with Robert's conspiracy theories. I looked at her in genuine surprise. Thanks for the rescue. She squeezed my arm lightly. That's what partners do, right? During the reception the following night, I found myself actually enjoying the celebration rather than anxiously monitoring Olivia's moods. When her college friends pulled her onto the dance floor, I had a great conversation with her brother-in-law about fly fishing in Colorado. When I joined a group debating the merits of different craft beers, Olivia brought me a sample from the bar. Thought you might want to try this local IPA they're talking about, she said, sliding it in front of me before rejoining her cousins. It was a small gesture, but telling. The old Olivia would have expected me to orbit around her at events like this, always available when she wanted attention, but invisible when she didn't. This new version was giving me space to enjoy myself while still finding ways to connect throughout the evening. Later, as we slow danced under the string lights, she rested her head against my shoulder. This has been nice, she said softly. I nodded, realizing with some surprise that it actually had been. Yeah, it has. For the first time in years, we'd attended a family function without a single Cold War or manipulative moment. It felt like progress, real progress. After 6 months of my personal rebellion, the dynamic between Olivia and me had shifted dramatically. The Cold War had gradually thawed into something resembling mutual respect. Still, we hadn't addressed the elephant in the room. The years of manipulation and emotional games that had nearly destroyed our marriage. One rainy Sunday afternoon, as we sat in the living room, me working on woodworking sketches, Olivia reading a novel, she suddenly set her book down. Adrian, she said, her voice steady but uncertain. Can we talk? I put my pencil down, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and hope. Sure. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months, she began, twisting her wedding ring nervously. About us. About how things were before. I waited, letting her find the words. I wasn't fair to you, she finally said, meeting my eyes. I used affection like a weapon, a tool to get what I wanted. Her candor surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness, maybe accusations that I'd been distant or difficult, not this direct acknowledgement. Yeah, I agreed simply. You did. She flinched slightly at my bluntness, but nodded. I don't know when it started. It wasn't conscious, at least not at first. But eventually, I realized I was doing it deliberately, withholding affection when you didn't fall in line. Why? I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. Because it worked, she finally said, and because it was easier than actually communicating, than being vulnerable and asking for what I needed. The honesty of her answer hit me hard. I miss who we used to be, she continued, her voice wavering slightly, before I turned our marriage into some kind of power struggle. I took a deep breath, wrestling with complicated emotions. I miss that too. But Liv, I can't go back to how things were. I don't want to, she said quickly. The way you've been these past few months, confident, independent, I've fallen in love with you all over again. I just don't know if you can ever trust me again after how I treated you. For the first time in our conversation, I saw a real fear in her eyes, fear that she'd damaged us beyond repair. Olivia's question hung in the air between us. Could I trust her again after everything? I'd spent months reclaiming my independence, learning to stand firm in the face of her manipulation tactics. But I hadn't really thought about what came next, whether our marriage could be salvaged, or if I was simply preparing for its end. I don't know, I said honestly. Trust isn't something you can just flip a switch and restore. It takes time. She nodded, eyes downcast. I understand. I haven't earned it back yet. But, I continued, causing her to look up. I'm willing to try if you are. Not to go back to how things were. I can't do that. But maybe to build something new. Something better. Relief washed over her face. I'd like that. I really would. Over the next few weeks, we entered unfamiliar territory. A relationship based on honest communication rather than emotional manipulation. It wasn't always easy. Years of unhealthy patterns don't disappear overnight. There were setbacks. Like when Olivia's company holiday party came around, and she assumed I'd attend without asking. When I mentioned I'd already made plans to finish a woodworking project that night, I saw a flash of the old Olivia, the slight narrowing of eyes, the subtle withdrawal of warmth. But instead of letting it spiral into the familiar Cold War, she caught herself. I should have asked you earlier, she admitted, taking a deep breath. Could we compromise? Maybe you come for an hour, then head back to work on your project. This simple moment, her recognizing the old pattern and choosing a different path, meant more than any grand gesture could have. We started seeing a marriage counselor, someone who helped us identify toxic patterns and develop healthier ways to communicate our needs. It was uncomfortable at times, having a stranger witness our dysfunction, but it was also liberating to have someone call us out when we slipped into old habits. The counselor gave us exercises, structured conversations where we had to really listen to each other without interrupting or becoming defensive. Simple in theory, surprisingly difficult in practice. What I need from you, Olivia said during one such exercise, is to know that you're still committed to us, even when you're rediscovering your independence. And what I need from you, I replied, is the freedom to say no without being punished for it. Little by little, we were learning to be partners again, not adversaries. I continued my woodworking, my friendships, my rediscovered hobbies, but now I shared these parts of my life with Olivia when she showed genuine interest. And to my surprise, she often did. The woman who had once rolled her eyes at my noise, now sometimes sat quietly in the corner of the garage while I worked, asking questions about different types of wood or techniques. It wasn't perfect. We still argued, still had moments of frustration and misunderstanding. But now, when we fought, it was an actual discussion, messy and emotional sometimes, but real. Not the calculated withdrawal of affection until someone surrendered. 1 year after I first stood my ground about the designer watch, Olivia and I were sitting on our back deck, watching the sunset. A lot had changed in those 12 months, most notably us. I was thinking, Olivia said, swirling her wine glass thoughtfully, about that weekend trip to Nashville we never took. The one I passed up because I wanted that watch instead. I glanced over at her, remembering the turning point that had set everything in motion. What about it? Maybe we could go next month, for our anniversary. She looked at me, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes that the old Olivia would never have allowed me to see. It might be nice to mark how far we've come. I smiled. I'd like that. It hadn't been an easy year. Rebuilding trust after years of manipulation took consistent effort from both of us. There were tough days, moments when old habits resurfaced, when I'd brace myself for the cold shoulder, or when Olivia would momentarily expect me to cave to her wishes. But those moments had become increasingly rare. Our weekly sessions with a counselor had given us tools to recognize unhealthy patterns and choose different paths. We'd learned to express needs directly instead of through emotional games. To disagree without it becoming a power struggle. The biggest change wasn't in our techniques or communication strategies, though. It was in our mindsets. I'd learned that standing firm didn't mean being combative, that independence didn't require isolation. And Olivia had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that honest connection was more fulfilling than control. You know what I realized the other day? I said, watching the colors deepen in the sky. I can't remember the last time you gave me the cold shoulder. Olivia winced slightly at the reminder of her old tactics, but nodded. I catch myself sometimes, still wanting to withdraw when things don't go my way. But it's different now. I recognize it for what it is. And I catch myself still watching for it, I admitted. Still waiting for the other shoe to drop sometimes. She reached for my hand. I'm sorry I made you feel that way for so long. I know, and I did. Her apology wasn't new. She'd said the words many times over the past year. But it was her consistent actions that had gradually rebuilt my trust. We weren't perfect. We still argued, still frustrated each other, still had days when we didn't communicate as well as we should. But now, our conflicts were honest, messy and emotional sometimes, but real. Not calculated power plays or emotional warfare. I love you, she said softly as the last light faded from the sky. Not because of what you do for me or whether you agree with me. Just you. I squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of that simple truth. For years, love in our marriage had been conditional, a currency exchanged for compliance. Now it was simply a gift, freely given. I love you too, I replied. And for the first time in a very long time, neither of us had anything to prove.